Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to today's Partner Web Conference. This is Fast Track Dynamics 365 for Talent Tech Talk. Today's topic, Understanding Talent Security. My name is Janice and I'm going to be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this web conference through Teams live events and the audio can be heard through your PC speakers. Today's web conference is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. Participation in the meeting today does indicate your consent to being included in the meeting recording. Attendees may access the web conference recording via a link that will be delivered by email within 5 business days. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, you can turn on the Q&A panel by selecting the question mark icon located on the right-hand corner of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions throughout the session. Now, on to the presentation. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Senior Program Manager Nilima Goodavali. So without any further delay, Nilima, it's all yours.
Thank you, Janice. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So everyone, thank you all for joining the call. And today we're going to discuss security principles, a bit of concepts related to the security model setup and talent. As you know that most of you probably might have actually already had a brief overview of this model, but we would be discussing a couple of important roles and a comparison, like which role works best for what kind of situation. And then we also be discussing on implementation guidelines, best practices, and role-based, and followed by a role-based demo, like how you can just change roles and modify roles and to be able to publish it and then assign it to users, the end-to-end process scenario. And then there's often I receive questions about like how this particular talent security interfaces with the CDS security, because one of the extension model we have is Power Apps and Flows, which works off of the CDS data model. So we will be discussing those concepts as well. In today's session, this is a kind of a first session in security where we would be discussing topics at a level 100 level, but we will be scheduling a follow-up sessions to go through more advanced features in coming days, and please stay tuned. But for this session, we would cover the scope and the agenda listed in here. So without any further ado, let's just get into the first topic, that's security principles. As you know that like talent security is a role-based security. In this picture that you can see how this the security is organized, which has a role and duties and privileges. This role-based security is, I mean, in the sense like the security is not given to the role-based security, is like the roles are assigned to users, and users who are assigned to a security role has access to a set of privileges that are associated with that role. So, and duties, as you see here, corresponds to parts of a business process. The administrator assigns duties to a security role. A duty can be assigned to more than one role. If you click on the duties, and you will see a couple of references where actually that how the duty is tagged to a different roles, and we will get to that part when we see the demo. This is just to give you an overall view of how role is organized. A role is organized in terms of set of duties, and duties contains the privileges. A privilege specifies the level of access that is required to perform a job or solve a problem or complete an assignment. For example, can I access this table in a view mode or an edit mode is a privilege. Privileges can be assigned directly to the roles, but however, we recommend that you only assign duties to roles. That means you can always group privileges to a duty and then assign duties to role. This because we are suggesting this because assigning a duties to the roles instead of adding privileges directly to the roles, but just to makes it easy for maintenance going forward. So and then the other concept with the roles is like roles always works as a hierarchical model. That means that the role hierarchies allows administrator to define a role based on another role. For example, a parent role and a child role. So when you assign a parent role to a user, a parent role automatically inherits duties and privileges conditions that are assigned to its child role. So And that's how the model works. And a role can have one or more child roles or one or more parent roles. So these are the basic security principles or aspects, which is nothing different from our regular dynamics finance and operation security model as well, which is more or less the same. But in our coming slides, we talk about the security aspects and roles specific to talent. So in a summary, a role is categorized as duties, and duties always duties are nothing but a set of privileges. And then a role is assigned to user, and user automatically inherits all the privileges that are part of that role. And role works is in a hierarchical fashion, which has a parent and child role concept. And when a user is assigned to parent role, he automatically inherit all the users duties and privileges that are tagged to the child role as well. And remember, and please note that this duties, once you define a duties as a components of security, these duties can be assigned to multiple roles. That means same duty can be part of a multiple roles. So that's one point to note. So let's talk about important roles in talent. For example, like we have human resource assistant and human resource manager. I just wanted to draw a simple comparison between these two roles because often people get confused with what is human resource when to use human resource assistant versus human resource manager. Basically, if you see human resource assistant is more of a power user role, which has access to the basic HR setup, and human resource manager is more of a view role, if you wanted to draw a general comparison. So that said, human resource assistant can maintain actions, can maintain jobs and positions, can maintain worker master, which is important, worker master setup, and maintain approve worker actions. But what human resource assistant cannot do is like this role cannot view, cannot set up processing of compensation benefits, and view access is also restricted for human resource assistant. Whereas human resource manager has a view access to all the setup process normally human resource assistant does. In addition to that, human resource manager will have an extra view access, which includes the shared parameters like HR shared parameters. If I say HR shared parameters, most of you probably may be aware that we do a lot of setup configuration in HR shared parameters, like how you want the financial dimensions to be dependent on, and what kind of so this one example is financial dimension setup is part of shared parameters, and there are a few others that we can go through. That it's a basic setup in the HR system, more of a configuration. Human resource manager role has edit access to shared parameters, and it has view access to all the setup process that normally HR assistant does. In addition to that, it also has a view access to compensation. So this is in general the difference between human resource assistant and human resource manager, and what human resource assistant can do and manager can do. More in general, most common scenario in most of the organizations that I've seen in the implementations is like a particular user will be performing assistant role, and also they would be viewing the reports and then making some decisions. In that scenario, we would recommend to use HR manager and HR assistant roles if user needs a full access to HR. If user needs a full access to HR, you need to assign these two roles. Otherwise, if your organization has a separate roles or separate user group for HR assistant, HR manager, you might as well wanted to use these roles as a two different users are assigned to two different users instead of combining it and assigning it to one user group. So that takes care of the basic setup or HR worker master of human resources. But when it comes to payroll aspects of it, so payroll administrator and payroll manager. So payroll administrator role is more of a HR assistant role with the payroll areas. That's the difference. So it's more or less similar to HR assistant role, but the scope is limited, or the scope includes payroll areas, I would say, more or less like. So payroll administrator will have a benefits access. Please note that in earlier slide, we talked about that HR assistant will not be having access to benefits and any of the compensation related data, but we are saying here the payroll administrator will have the benefits view access, and they can as well view the shared parameters and op census, benefit setup and eligibility. Whatever is the data required to feed into the payroll, so payroll administrator will have access to that data. A part of a compensation related details also. And payroll manager role here is more of an authorized activity role in the payroll process. This is more of an approval role and can view information across HR and payroll areas. So if I can say that, like, payroll manager is more of completing, denying or recall, reject worker actions using a workflow, and as well as maintain worker actions. So that's pretty much about the payroll administrator and payroll manager role. So in general, in summary, payroll administrator role is more, it's similar to HR assistant role, with the scope is more broadened scope with the payroll areas. Payroll manager is more of an, as I said, that it authorizes an activity in the payroll processes, and more of can approve, deny any of the worker actions and workflows. Then we are reaching to an important role here, the compensation and benefits manager. The reason why I grouped these two roles into one slide is this is the most people are like implementing the system, and most of the implementations I've said that this is a confusion point. So what compensation benefits manager can do versus what manager can do, and which role needs to be assigned to whom. So in order to understand that, probably we need to understand our compensation structure in the HR module a little bit. If you understand the compensation process in HR module, the compensation events happens as you set up, like probably 6 months and once in a year, and then compensation or benefits manager can set up those events and then can run the compensation process and can approve results or deny results. If we, let's say that if he decides to approve the results, he can also load the results. So when we say results, what exactly meant by these results? Like, for example, when you set up a compensation event and try to run the compensation review process in any organization, probably it's a 6 months or once in a year, that means that there will be a pay increase in employees based on certain parameters or metrics, and that pay increases can be reviewed, and once the results looks good, and you would be loading that to an employee master. This end-to-end process is right now handled through a compensation and benefits manager role. Often we do receive a question that why can't we just handle it through a why can't we assign this role to a manager and let manager handles this process? The problem with that is, like, compensation and benefits manager access is not restricted to his or her hierarchy, in the sense, like, if you say manager works with this reporting hierarchy, a line manager line hierarchy. So we do have, but compensation benefits manager is not restricted to hierarchy. He will have access to benefits and compensation information, not based on the reporting hierarchy. So what will happen is, if you assign this compensation benefits manager to your regular manager, he will not only be seeing the compensation data of his hierarchies, but he will see the compensation data of the organization. So that's a problem. That is the reason why we would not recommend, if that is not the process, if that is not the security process that you wanted to follow, you wanted a manager only to view his report is compensation structure, then that's not a recommended approach of assigning a compensation benefits manager role to manager. The compensation benefits manager is a centralized role which centrally administers the compensation process. In a summary, that's the objective of creating this role. Manager role is meant for managing his reporting hierarchies, approvals, and working on behalf of exec and personal actions for hire, transfer, and termination action. So these two roles are meant for different objectives. So that's what I wanted to call this out as a comparison between compensation benefits manager and manager role. So with that, I think we would be just also discuss a little bit about best practices here. Usually what will happen is, like in general, in some of the implementations, I've seen that the security consultant usually assign a standard roles if there are not many changes in the authorization matrix which organization wants versus what is available as a standard. But the problem with that is, like, it's not wrong. You can assign standard roles, but I wanted to call out a specific aspect of the standard role here. Basically, what will happen is, I'll just take one example and explain that. For example, if we are modifying the compensation and benefits workspace and we decided to add a new functionality, as and when the product is added with the new functionality, this new functionality needs to be performed by someone. So we will release some kind of a new duties, or we'll add an extra privileges, let's say. And then we also decides as part of this feature which role will be performing this new duty, and then we will add that privileges to that corresponding role. Let's say, for example, you end up adding a standard role. That means that standard role automatically be modified with the release of the new duties and new feature, and automatically the user who is having access to this role will inherit all of these privileges without your knowledge. So that is one of the reason why, let's say, if you don't want that to happen, you wanted to first see that and decide whether this new privileges or new functionality should be given to this user or not. It is always better that you duplicate role and assign it to the user. And then as and when we release the functionality, you test that out, the functionality, and see that if it's an appropriate for this user who is already managing some of the functionality to get the new functionality as well. Once you decide that, maybe you can add corresponding duties and privileges to custom role instead of directly giving them with all the new functionality as part of the standard role. That's one of the reasons why we are saying that it's better to duplicate the role if you are following the standards, if you're following the very streamlined security process, and then wanted to understand the changes before you assign this to existing users. And then also, as I said before, when we are discussing the security components of talent, or for that matter, the Dynamics F&O talent platform, we'll have duties and privileges. So when you said duties are not specific to one role. When we have one specific duty, multiple roles can use this duty. So changing a duty is not recommended, because remember that when you're changing a duty, all the roles that has right now these duties will be impacted by that change. So it's always better to duplicate this duty to a custom duty space and then change the duties. The other thing is, like, sometimes we are just wanted to change roles quickly, then we'll just end up adding a couple of new privileges to that role, or take the privileges from here and there from multiple duties and then assign it to role directly. It is not wrong, but it is like it would not ease out the maintenance aspects of the role. It's better you group all of those privileges to one single duty and then add it, so that you can maintain that duty even future, and you understand, that, like, this duty is referenced in how many roles, and if you're changing or modifying. For easy maintenance, what we recommend is, we always recommend to group privileges and assign it to your duty first, and then add it to the role, instead of adding a privileges directly to the role. And then the other aspect of it is segregation of duties. This is a very useful functionality available right now, but I don't see many implementations using this functionality. Whenever you have a complex medium to complex security setup, you will always worry about the segregation of duties. For example, the person who is entitled to change the compensation should not be probably approving the compensation. Maybe just as an example I'm taking. I mean, there's a conflict there. So unless you define this conflict somewhere, you will not be able to audit the role as a holistic approach, as like overall. You may remember that some roles has this, and then you will modify. But what if for a future maintenance? That's the reason why we always recommend define your segregation of duties first. as a Bible, and then resolve or audit all the roles for conflicts and resolve the conflicts, which keeps the system, the security aspects of the system are set up in a way that you wanted, complying with your security and segregation of duties like that you wanted to define for your organization. So one of the aspect that I also wanted to touch base, in addition to the 4 different best practices, although I won't say that it is not actually best practice, but I wanted to talk about the safe use a little bit here. A safe use is a feature that will be released. It's not yet released, but I know that there's quite a bit of interest on this feature, and people wanted to understand this feature. So this is a feature which helps you to define your a system administrator to define a views and publish views, so that you can enable filtering of the data in a specific form, the overall form. So it sits on top of your overall security after you define what user can see versus not. Let's say if a person has access to benefit space and access to entities and access to and can view the information of benefits, after you define all of this, then you can define a specific view of the benefits workspace and publish, so that you can also filter some content while doing so. And more information, much more details about saved views will be discussed in the coming sessions. But for now, I just wanted to call this out to your attention that this is one of the most important asked feature that's coming up. Please note for any announcements on the saved views going forward, and we will definitely be surely be including in the next set of discussions, and we'll talk more about this feature. Let's get to this demo part, wherein we would be discussing how, if at all, if we wanted to address a particular problem statement or an outcome, how you exactly modify the role and then manage the changes and publish the changes to that roles. In this particular demo, the main problem statement or outcome we wanted to derive is human resource manager role, as we discussed earlier, has access to access to shared parameter configuration. And but if I don't want to give, because shared parameters is a very critical configuration in HR space, and but if you don't want to give that access to human resource manager role, how you wanted to change, what is the process to change, or how exactly you will modify the role so that you will convert that shared parameter configuration from edit to view. Obviously, you wanted to give a view access to human resource manager, the shared parameters view to human resource, but you don't want human resource manager to edit the shared parameters configuration. So that's the outcome we wanted to derive. So let's get to the talent and see like how we can achieve this outcome. I'm going to share my screen, the talent screen here. So most of you may be right now already familiar with the screen. It's a place where you define the segregation of duties and roles, duties, privileges. There's like individual components we have already discussed: roles, duties, privileged, and we also discuss about unpublished objects here. So right now, what I have done is like, let me just quickly display the human resource manager role here. So this is references, like you wanted to understand the references that right now human resource manager has, that you might want to click here and see that what all the duties that human resource manager right now have. So here, if you see that specific duty, that's right now as part of our problem statement. If you click the privileges here, it shows that this particular privilege, which is like part of enable human resource process duty, which is in turn part of a human resource manager. If you see that little bit of the component structure, human resource manager, we are trying to expand the references of the duty references, and we are with the enable human resource process duty, and then we are trying to see what privileges it has. If you see the privileges, it has human HCM shared parameters entity maintain, and maintain human resource parameters, maintain shared human resource parameters. This is what we don't want. I mean, this, like, we wanted this to be we want all of this 4 to be converted as a view into in not maintain access, because I don't want to provide the outcome of modifying this role is like restricting this role only to view of the shared parameters, but not to the edit access. For that, what I have done is here, like just to save time. So I know that this is enable human resource process is a duty and has a privileges which gives this access. Now, what I need to be doing is as a first step that I would be changing this duty so that I can change privileges from edit to view. So will I be changing a standard duty? The answer is no. What I would be doing is I would be duplicating that duty to a custom duty. Then I would be changing the privileges. Just to save demo time, I have already copied or duplicated that duty to a Z duty. So for example, this one is like a duty which is copied from a standard enable human resource process duty. Then I've changed the privileges to view mode. It has just a view right now. And the entity, the edit is changed to view right now. Now, after we create this new duty or duplicate the standard duty to Z duty and change the privileges, the next step is we wanted to add this duty to human resource manager role. For that, will I be changing a standard role? Definitely not. What I should be doing is I will be copying this new role to a custom human resource manager to a custom role. Say copied this. So it inherits now, or it automatically copies all the permissions and duties and privileges it has. Now, if you click the duties, see it automatically duplicated all the references it has with the previous role. So now the parent role, I should not call it as a parent role, but the original role. So now what I'm going to do is like enable human resource process is the one that gives the this access, but we don't want this because we wanted to add our Z duty. Then I'm gonna remove this reference right now. For that, just select the duty and say remove reference. The reference is removed. Now, what I need to do is right now, I need to add a new reference to this role, which is like our Z duty. So this is a duty that I'm gonna add because this particular Z duty has a view access instead of edit. So now I've added this duty here to the newly duplicated role that human resource Z underscore human resource manager 3 with the view access. So after completing these steps, the step that I should be doing to make this role work is to publish. Here you can just say publish selection or publish all because it's only one row. So I'm going to say publish all. It's done now. So now after I do that, then the next step that I should be doing is, so the role is ready. Now I should be going to the manage users and assign this newly created role to a particular user, which I've already done. So I'm just going to show that like, this like human resource assistant and human resource manager, both the Z roles are assigned to the same user ID. So with this roles now, because I've restricted an edit access to human resource shared parameters, when you log in with this particular user ID into demo, you will not be having edit access to human resource shared parameters, but in turn you will be only having a view access. So that's how the stepwise approach of how you usually edit and manage roles in normal security setup that when you are configuring the security model for your talent system. So with that, I think what we can do is like now let's just get on to the next set of the concepts that we wanted to discuss. Basically, I just probably wanted to discuss a little bit about CDS security. You may be wondering why I wanted to discuss CDS security in this session. Yes, the reason for that is, as I explained earlier, that one of the extensibility model that we have is Power Apps and Flow. The data source for Power Apps and Flow is a CDS. So oftentimes I kind of receive a question that, oh, can I use the same roles which are defined in Talent for Power Apps and Flow? Or should I be defining a new roles? This is a question that normally most of the times I was asked. So to answer that question, should I be using the talent roles, or should I be using the talent roles for my Power Apps and Flow, or should I be defining a new set of roles in CDS? The answer is CDS security needs to be set up for Power Apps and Flow, because the fundamental security principle is from where you are extracting the data, the source of the data, the security aspects of that data should be followed. So here for Power Apps and Flow, the source of the data is CDS. So that is the reason why you need to define CDS roles and assign it to the users for Power Apps data extraction or Flow data extraction. The talent roles that are defined earlier, we cannot use those roles for Power Apps and Flow, but you need to mimic the privileges that are there in the talent roles, or if you define a new set of metrics, or if you wanted to follow the same metrics, that authorizations needs to be defined one more time in CDS again, using a CDS security principles, so that you can restrict the data extraction authorization, or you want whatever the approach, whatever the security metrics that you wanted to follow for Power Apps and Flow, you will end up defining that security max within the CDS. So in summary, talent roles cannot be used for Power Apps and Flow. You will be defining once again the role and authorization matrix within the CDS using the CDS security principles, and then allow your Power Apps and Flow to use that security principles. We will be discussing the CDS security aspects a little bit about the concepts and how you would be using the concepts in Power Apps and Flow. We'll be discussing in the next set of the slides. So that's the objective of the next set of the slides. So when we say CDS, CDS will have a common roles, like a set of default roles like system administrator, system customizer, environment maker, and common data service user, so on and so forth, and which we will be discussing in the next slides, like what each role can offer as part of the standard security matrix. But however, when you see the screen, in general, if you talk about any security model, that you will have a first thing that comes to our mind is like the CRUD operations, the read, write, delete, append. This is a CRUD, normal CRUD. And then this CRUD is applicable for the entity model. Like you have set of entities, and whether you can, what CRUD operations that you wanted to provide to user is what can be defined here. So that's the first level of authorization matrix. Within that, let's say, for example, in talent scenario, worker entity. So in worker entity, you have provided a read authorization to the user, but now you wanted to restrict the read authorization only for the records that he creates. Let's say he owns, like HR administrator has created a master, a worker master for some, let's say 10 worker master records that you wanted to restrict the authorization for those 10 records. So then in that scenario, what will happen is like, that means you still wanted to give a read authorization. So that means CRUD at the basics as a basic setup is true, but within the read, then you again wanted to restrict based on certain parameters like who owns that records. So that is what is defined. That is also can be defined here. If you see that, like there is some yellow balls and green balls. So these yellow and green, the color difference is what decides what level of authorization within the read, what level of authorizations within create, what level of authorizations within write. So that means the first setup is CRUD. Within the CRUD, the level of authorization for each of the CRUD can be defined here. So this is the scope of the CRUD, I would call as like can be defined here. So the way that you can define the scope of the CRUD is basically by using a I can show you that like how you define those CRUD, but it's like in general what we call it as a global access, deep access, local access, and basic access. If you say the entire green, so that means that the access level is given to all the users, like user across all records of all organization. But if it's a deep access, then access level given to user of a particular business unit or business subordinate business units, or the child business units, probably, if I use that word. And if you say local, the access level gives to user access to records that within the user's business unit itself. And then the basic is just the records that you create. That means, first of all, you are allowing a read access to that entity. That's the first level of authorization. Within the read access also, by using this global, deep, local, basic, you will be refining the scope of that read, to what level or what records you can read from that entity. So that's how this matrix is defined. And this authorization is grouped into a role, and a role will be assigned to a user. So that is normal process, but in general, but this matrix is important for us because this plays a very vital role in defining the extraction process. So with that, I think let's understand a set of standard roles that are part of now the CDS security model. A system administrator, system customizer, environment maker, common data service is the most widely used roles. I just wanted to draw your attention to a system administrator first, because it's an all kind of access role, and it's a pretty standard role, and you cannot modify this role in general. So it's like any user it comes with a standard set of permissions, and you can modify the role. The role that is really important for us to understand is environment maker. This role is the one which helps whoever is a user having access to this role or assigned to this role, they can create apps, connections, custom APIs, and everything. That means if any user, if you want to give authorization to a user in your organization to create a Power Apps and Flow, as a creator, as a technical person that he is creating a Power Apps and Flow, you should be assigning this environment maker role to them. Common data service user, the name, as name suggests, it's just an user role. It can help running a Power Apps and Flows, but he won't be having an access to creating a Power Apps and Flow. So this is like a fundamental concepts that we should be knowing before we go to Power Apps and Flow and then manage the security aspects of Power Apps and Flow. I'm not going to discuss how we create a Power App and Flow, but the next set of slides, we'll probably be focusing more on kind of a different security scenarios or security aspects of Power Apps and Flow. Because some of the questions that are usually received from the customers and partners is basically, okay, users have access to Power Apps portal, but how I can restrict them from editing a specific app, or how I can restrict editing a particular flow. So these are the questions I usually receive. Let's answer those questions in the next set of slides. Basically, when you say Power Platform and Power Portal, the first gating process is your authorization, your login, username, and password, and that's known, that's anywhere there. The second gating process is licensing. And there, if you have the planned license as part of the, which should be given as part of the Power Platform portal, then you will be allowed to do your operations there. And then, as we discussed, Environment Maker is a role which helps you to create flows and Power Apps. That's what we talked about earlier. So the third gating process is whether you have a required role to create an apps and flows. In general, I'm not going to talk about gateways and all of that, but the question is Power Apps and Flow. So we restrict the conversation to Power Apps and Flow. And the fourth gating process is like, okay, so if app is created by someone, how can I use this app? So like the owner of the app is someone, but I just wanted to use it as a user. How can I use that? So, to answer that particular question, that how can I use an app, then we have a concept called sharing. Especially with the Canvas app, sharing can be done directly with the user, which we are going to review those scenarios in a bit. And so that's how you use the app. And the last is like the data extraction, which is very important. Okay, now I know that who should be given authorization to create an app. And the owner of the app knows that how he can share the app to user so that user can run the app. The next question we should be answering is, okay, now I can run the app, but what I should be seeing or what I should not be seeing as part of the data. Let's say if I create an app which extracts all the worker records, I can run the app because owner of the app shared that app with me. Now, I need to run the app. I will be running the app. So can I see all the data records? No, because it should follow a security matrix in your organization. It depends on your security model. Let's say if you wanted to restrict worker records in that app, then how do you do that? So that means like the last point is all about the data extraction restrictions. So we started from the first gating process of login, and the second gating licensing, and third gating is the role, and fourth gating is like how I run the app as a user. And then we are now talking about the data extraction restrictions. So these are the set of gating procedure in Power Apps and Flow. But let's talk about let's talk about the last 2 points here, because we discussed about licensing part of it in general, and we know the roles now. Although at least the names and what each role can help us. And then we will discuss about sharing, we'll discuss about the authorization matrix and the data restriction aspects of Power Apps and Flow. Because now we know the security principles in CDS, like how you can configure the data access to entities. And then now we will be discussing the sharing of the apps and the roles part of it. So there are a set of scenarios that I wanted to demo. First, before we do that, let's first quickly review the common data service roles that we were discussing. If you see that this is the environment is already open, that's the reason I can just quickly check on the security roles. These are the roles that we discussed, the serious roles in my previous slides. Common data service user, delegate, environment maker, and some of these roles like most system administrator and system customizer. Let me just quickly focus on common data service user role, because most users in your organizations will be with this role. Not many will have environment maker. One person or one or two will have a system administrator. So if you see the common data service user role here, it will take you to the previous screenshot that we have. Let's say, for example, in this role, the entity that's in question right now, or the entity which we have a lot of focus in this discussion, is worker entity, because in general, that's the entity which you wanted to start your security or authorization matrix. Like that's a starting entity. Let's say if I wanted to give an authorization to this particular entity. If you see here, the key is like, if it's like this, none is selected. That means you're not even giving any authorization. This is the overall CRUD, by the way. As a first setup, this is your CRUD. Create, read, write, delete, append, to, and essential. Within this CRUD, now I'm defining a second level of metrics here. Now, let's say if I just say that first click, that means I'm just only giving the worker is set to user. And then if I just do one more click, now the authorization is set to business unit. Worker, he can see all the records of that business unit. And then I just click one more, not only of his business unit, but he will also see the parent business unit as well. Now I click one more, I can see the entire organization. So that's how you provide an authorization within the CRUD. So now let's say I'm just rolling it back to the same old none selected here, but if you just with every click, then you are increasing an authorization. But if you wanted to roll back, that same process that you need to follow. So right now, we will be using two user IDs. One is solution architecture user ID, which is this user ID, which is like an owner or a system administrator role. And there is one more user ID, which I would be using called int demo, which will be a common data service user. So let's review those users as well. Let's say, so this is the user ID, which is right now assigned to, if you see the managed roles, it has only common data service user, environment maker. That means it can create an apps and it can use the data. But please remember, earlier when we are demoing the common data service user, we haven't provided an access to worker entity. Worker entity is none selected. So that means like, although int demo has a common data service user, the worker authorization is restricted to that particular int demo, because right now int demo is assigned to this particular role and as well as environment maker role. So now let's talk about the scenarios. The first scenario is, how do I share a Power App? What options that I have in sharing a Power App? So let me just quickly log into the app portal using my system administrator. So I've created a simple app just for a demo purpose. Let's say, for example, this app, as an app maker, I have created. So this ID is the owner of this app. Now I wanted to share this app. Let's say if I'm sharing this app, what options I have. So as I said, now this is a user who will be using this app. So when I click on this user, you see that the co-owner is not marked. That means that I wanted to give permissions to integration demo just as a user, but not as a owner. What that means is, like, when integration demo access this app, it cannot edit, modify, or change this app. It can only use this app. So that's the meaning of it. So, and then if you see this Power App, it's a simple Power App. What it does is basically it calls a flow, and that flow extracts a worker records. It has a button which calls the flow, and that flow extracts a worker records. Like, for example, if you go to the flows in this environment created by SA login, which is a system administrator, in this scenario, you see that it has some flow called Tech Talk Flow Worker List. So the app that's created earlier and that I've shown earlier is going to call this flow, which in turn extracts all the worker records. So with this functionality, let's explore different scenario as to how you can control an authorization. As we discussed earlier, the int demo as a user, it can access a Power App because the Power App is already shared. And because the Power App is calling a flow, it can access a flow. But what flow does is, like, it extracts a worker records. But whether int demo can extract a worker records or not is a question. The outcome is it cannot, because the common data service user is not having a worker authorization. And int demo is assigned with the common data service user. Common data service user is not having a worker authorization. So you can still execute a Power App. You can still call a flow from int demo, but it would not extract a worker records or display a worker records to int demo, because int demo is assigned with the role which is not having access authorization to or read authorization to worker records. Let's review that scenario a little bit here. I'm just going to log off and log in back with our user ID, but not the system administrator ID. So I'm logging with int demo just to run a Power App. So the Power App is there in employee self-service. It has just it's a simple Power App which has a button which will call a flow, and flow has a step which calls all the worker records. I'm just saying that call flow. So this is called, now the flow is called. Let's explore if flow extracts and give a worker records. If you see here, we can just track the flow execution from here also. So this is a flow that's called into the Power App. Let's see the run history of this flow. It failed. The reason why it failed is basically, if you see that it failed because of the authorization, the privilege count is missing. So it says that read worker privilege is missing. So although I did not handle an exception, which is in a way that I supposed to be handling, like for example, if you do the normal regular Power Apps and flow, what you would be doing is you would be capturing this exception, displaying an authorization message back to Power App saying that you don't have an authorization. But this was for just a demo purpose. So that's why I just wanted to keep that error intact. So it does not have an authorization because the int demo is not having an authorization to worker records. So the common data service user is not having an authorization to worker records. That's the reason why it end up failing with the error message that the worker authorization missing. So if you notice this whole scenario, there are three summary points that we can conclude. One is that I logged in as an int demo here. I logged in as an int demo, called up flow. That means like my user ID that passed to Power App is int demo. Then the same ID exists in the CDS, and as and when I call the flow knows that I'm calling with the user ID called int demo. It goes and checks the authorizations assigned to int demo. We have discussed int demo is assigned with the two roles. One is that environment maker and common data service user. The common data service user is not having an authorization to worker records. That's the reason why it failed. So once again, if you see this roles assigned to this one, it has two roles assigned. One is the common data service user and environment maker. Common data service is not having access to worker records. That's the reason why when you call the flow from a Power App, it failed. The worker extraction is failed. So that's how it restricts. You can restrict an authorization. So in the fourth summary, the final important summary that we can conclude from the scenario is talent roles will not be same as the CDS roles. Because the reason why I'm saying the statement is like if you see the int demo, the user roles assigned to the int demo in HR is human resource assistant, human resource manager, which has access to worker records. But did it fetch worker records when I started executing with this ID? No, because when I started executing using a flow, it goes and checks back the CDS permissions, and the CDS permissions is nothing but CDS roles, and it checks both the roles assigned to int demo. That's nothing but environment maker and common data service user. Since because the common data service user is not having these worker authorization, it failed to extract that worker information back into talent. So these are the four summary statements that we can conclude here. One is that CDS security roles are different from talent roles. Talent role has a different, you can mimic the authorization matrix, but you will have to set up a roles in CDS. Second summary point is when you are calling a flow from a Power App, it knows that with you which user ID you are calling, and when before extracting the data, it goes and checks your permissions within the CDS. If you have permissions, it extracts the data. So, and then the third aspect of it is like from the first scenario that we demoed, when you are sharing a Power App, you can share a Power App in a user mode. You don't have to share it as an owner if you wanted to restrict and edit authorizations for the users. So, and let's also talk about one more scenario here, which is like so we have discussed sharing a Power App. We discussed about calling a flow from Power App without a share and edit authorization. We have seen that. What about manually triggered flows and data extraction? Let's say, for example, a flow can also be created just like, let's say, for example, you wanted to run some data extraction report off of the flow, and then that is created. But you don't want everyone to edit flow. You just wanted people to come and execute the flow and see some statistics and then close the flow. So how do we do that? So let's see that. So right now I assigned with the owner login. Here owner I'm referring as a solution architect who has created this flows and apps, and the user is int demo. So for example, if you see this particular flow here, manual trigger flow. So in our earlier scenario, we were discussing that I have created a flow as an owner, that's SA, solution architect login, but I don't want my user to edit this flow, but he just need to run this flow as a user. So for that, what you can do is like, let's see that how we can do that. Just simple manual trigger flow. So you have, if you notice this, you have this run only users. So you can edit this and then have this int demo added as a user to this one. So that means like what you're technically saying is like, I don't want to give all the access to owner access to each demo, but I would just be giving a user access. That means he cannot, if integration demo user logs into his portal, Power Platform portal, he cannot modify or change this flow, and he can just only execute the flow. So what we can do is like, let's just log into integration demo and observe the permissions from the integration demo portal as well. If you see here, if you see from this integration demo user, you will see this Power App, but can you edit this Power App? No. The reason why as a user he cannot edit the Power App is because I shared this Power App with him as a user, but not as a owner. But he can certainly play that. That means he can run this Power App. And also, that's one aspect of it because we shared that flow. And then when you go to the flows also, the other thing check we need to do is like, can he create an app and flow? Yes, he can create his own app and flow. The reason behind is he is assigned with an environment maker access. Let's say that if we can test that, see that like he's having an authorization, so he can create. Let me just create one simple create from blank. So he can do that. The reason why he can do his own apps and flow is because he is having an environment maker access. The reason why he cannot edit this Power App here is that because we didn't give him the owner permissions for this app. He is just a user for this app because the owner of this Power App is the other user, which is an SA user. So these are some of the some scenarios as to how you can restrict an authorizations when you are working in a Power Platform portal. But in general, there are four different aspects, that four different summary points that if you see here is like, when you are extending a talent using a Power Apps and Flow, please do remember that you need to take care of the CDS security model in order to restrict the data extraction policies. So that's one aspect of it. But at a component level, which is like a Power App and Flow, I'm referring it as a components. How you wanted to restrict an authorization is like how you share. If it's a Power App, how you are going to share this Power App. Like you can share it as just as a user. If you want to just give a control as only to execution level. But let's say if you wanted an edit access as a co-owner, then you would be actually sharing this Power App as a co-owner, then this particular user also will get that permissions. But if you don't want this user to edit the Power App, just execute the Power App, then you would be sharing this app only as a user. Same is the case with the flow as well. For example, if you see that one important call out that I have here is like in this flows, nowhere you would be seeing the flow that is called from the Power App because I didn't share the flow with this user. I actually called the flow from a Power App because this Power App is already shared with the user. He will have every right to call that flow. So that means net what happens is like SA user created a Power App and flow, and we have only given a execution authorization for Power App. With that, he can execute the Power App, he can execute the flow which is behind the Power App, and he cannot extract the data. The reason why he cannot extract the data is like I didn't give the worker authorization. But let's say you provide an authorization to worker entity, then what this user, the integration demo user can do is he can run the Power App, run the flow, which is like connected to that Power App and can extract the data. So this is an overall matrix on how the CDS security interfaces with the talent security. That's it. We are at the top of the hour. So if you wanted to if you wanted to ask more questions and ideas, sorry, we don't have much time for questions. But you can always send us an email, and if you have some ideas that how you wanted to how you would like this talent and security to be enhanced further, please also post your ideas in the ideas portal. That said, we are actually working on talent security for enhancing, and we have some ideas to enhance the talent security for as a record level security. And as and when we are finalizing that features and we are about to release that features to product, then we will organize one more session, and then we can discuss those topics as well. So, and thank you so much. And this concludes the session.
All right, thank you, Nalima. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take a brief moment here and bring your attention to a link that I posted in the Q&A panel. That's a link to a short survey for this web conference. We ask that you please take a moment before logging out to access it. We hope that you found today's information helpful, and if you enjoyed today's web conference, have feedback on how we can provide you with a better event, or you'd like to submit topics for future web conferences, this is your chance to let us know. We do appreciate the time you take to do this, and thank you for your support. And that is going to conclude today's web conference. The recording and a copy of the presentation deck will be available within 5 business days. Please look for an email from Worldwide Learning that will include details on how to access those. I'd like to extend a big thank you to Nalima for joining us today, and thank you, audience, for logging in and sharing our time. Enjoy the rest of your day.